What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. There's been some commander unbanning, so we're going to talk about that today. But first, let's temper some expectations. Dockside, Mana Crypt, and Jeweled Lotus are going to remain banned. They did touch on them and what they plan to do with them in the future though, so stay tuned to the end of the video because we are going to talk about that. But for the format, we're going to talk about the unbanned cards, we're going to talk about what Gavin says in the article, and then I'm going to talk about where we're going to see these cards played, and probably the most disgusting things you can do with some of the cards they unbanned, because they unbanned some disgusting cards. So without further ado, click on that whatnot link, get your free $15, get 10% off of all of your Tolarian library proxies whenever you use code DT for D, and let's get right into it. The first thing I want to touch on is their criteria for what deserves to get unbanned. You had number 1, cards that have some fond memories associated with them. Number 2, cards that can contribute to positive play patterns and enjoyable decks or splashy moments. And then number 3, cards that don't create runaway games or negative play patterns. And then you have one of the first cards being Braids, and right off rip, I'm super confused because that's insane to put right after these words. For those of you that have the pleasure of not knowing, Braids is a 4 CMC, 2 black, 2 generic, legendary creature human minion. That says, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact, creature, or land. But let's go ahead and let Gavin explain himself here. He says, this card is a beloved character, a card many are nostalgic. When played as one of your 99 cards or later in the game, it's a totally reasonable effect with an appropriate impact on the game. The most frustrating Braids games are when it's put out extremely quickly and people feel locked under it. However, as little as a single removal spell can really set that entire plan back. As commander decks have become more efficient with more targeted removal spells, and players have gotten better at identifying commanders they don't want to play against and having pre-game conversations, so that gives us the confidence to bring back Braids. A lot has changed since Braids was banned in 2009. We mostly believe people will know what they're signing up for in a game with Braids as the commander, and as a card in the 99, it is reasonable and acceptable. To that I say, beloved by who, Gavin? Beloved by who? This man just said, hey, it dies to removal, and shipped it. No, all jokes aside though, Braids is going to be an extremely toxic commander to play against, and I think a lot of the players that have gotten into this game after 2009 need a warning. This commander is not okay. As Gavin said, it's really brutal to play when it's shutting you off from playing your entire deck, and that's exactly all this deck tries to do. This deck tries to play Braids turn 1 if possible, and then you're going to be completely shut out from all of your lands for the entire rest of the game. So this deck is either going to be something you scoop to turn 1 or 2, or it's going to do barely anything all game. So just something to look out for. Moving on to our next card, we have Gifts Ungiven. For 3 generic and a blue, we get an instant that says, search your library for up to 4 cards with different names and reveal them. Target opponent chooses 2 of those cards, put the chosen cards into your graveyard and the rest into your hand, then shuffle. This is an extremely powerful effect. CEDH players might jump on it, they might not. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but let's talk about the justification. Gavin states, this is a beloved card with a great history. Many of you out there have enjoyed casting this card in all sorts of formats. We're excited to return it to Commander. The previous concern had been the nature of this as a power tutor, the time-intensive casting process, and the combos enabled by this card. We considered this within the structure of brackets and just regular pre-game conversations. If your deck is trying to infinite combo people with this, they should often help sort out if they are playing in the right environment. On the other hand, a fair Gifts Ungiven is very fun and akin to Fact or Fiction in the politics and interplay between players it can create. Right out of the gate, this reminds me of Intuition. This essentially does the same thing, but it's 3 mana and you only get to tutor up 3 cards, and then one of those cards goes into your hand and the other 2 go into the graveyard. So this gives you an additional card into your hand and allows you to tutor for an additional card. Right out of the gate, I see this in a CEDH play pattern scenario where yes, it costs 1 additional mana, but getting that additional card is massive, especially for your Breach combos. If you guys don't know how Underworld Breach combos works, you need Underworld Breach, you need Brain Freeze, and you need Lion-Eye Diamond. Lion-Eye Diamond, you sacrifice it, discard your entire hand, and add 3 mana of any color to your mana pool. Brain Freeze is 2 CMC, and it says target player mills 3 cards, and then it has Storm. And then last but not least, Underworld Breach says every card in your graveyard has Escape. Its escape cost is equal to its CMC. So now you're essentially able to mill your entire library using Brain Freeze and LED to create a huge Storm count, and then you can cast anything in your deck. What Gifts Ungiven is going to give us here is the opportunity to actually tutor up Savine's Reclamation. This is a 3 CMC card, 2 generic and a white, that says return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was cast from your graveyard, you may copy this spell and you may choose 2 targets for the copy, and it has a flashback cost of 5 CMC. So not only does it not matter what they give us in this scenario, because we can just either flashback Savine's Reclamation, or if they give us Underworld Breach, we can just straight up cast Underworld Breach and start going off with LED. So this does make the combo a little bit more clean, but it is 1 additional mana. But I think this is going to be the first thing players are going to try to do with this card. The next card they're unbanning is basically Blue Worldfire. Sway the Stars. For 8 generic and 2 blue, so 10 total mana, you get a sorcery that says each player shuffles his or her hand, graveyard, and permanents he or she owns into his or her library, then draws 7 cards. Each player's life total becomes 7. Gavin states, a 10 mana way to reset the game akin to Worldfire, which was previously unbanned in Commander to little fanfare or play. There are some players who enjoy the effect. It is an impactful card, but not very powerful. There are plenty of other spells that cost 8 or more mana that have a far higher impact than Sway. Our guess is that this will see little play, but the people who enjoy cards like these will now be able to play another one. I completely agree here. I don't see a lot of people playing this card, but hey, but for the people that like doing chaos things like Worldfire, boom, now you've got 2 of them. We're also getting Coalition Victory back. For 8 CMC, 3 generic, and Wooburg, you get a sorcery that says you win the game if you control a land of each basic land type and a creature of each color. So the reason this was banned in the first place is if you have a 5 CMC commander and cast this with your 5 basic lands, boom, you've won the game. Gavin states, this card engendered a great deal of discussion. A lot of it boils down to how impactful and how much of an auto-include it is in a deck with 5 color commander. It essentially reads, you win the game if you control your commander. That is not the most satisfying end to a game, and it does begin to become an auto-include for many decks. Is that an appropriate card to exist? However, it can easily be interacted with. A single removal spell in response to your 5 color commander means you spend 8 mana to do nothing. You also need to untap with your commander in 8 mana, and there are many expensive spells that will do something akin to ending the game in a 5 color deck if you resolve them. Additionally, for those engaging with commander brackets, it is within time frame of where we expect a win or combo to fall. Honestly, I think Coalition Victory is one of those cards that's going to see a resurgence and then instantly kind of get weeded out by the player base again. It's one of those cards that's fun to do once, but then you do it twice, and then you start to feel, oh, this isn't fun at all, and I'm just not enjoying playing my deck anymore, so players just kind of auto-cut it. If you've ever played with a Primal Surge deck, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Panoptic Mirror is also getting unbanned. This is a 5 CMC artifact that says imprint X and then tap it. You may remove an instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost X in your hand from the game. And then it says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may copy an imprinted instant or sorcery card, and you may play the copy without paying its mana cost. Gavin says, I personally have been a Panoptic Mirror enjoyer since it was originally printed back in Darksteel. The promise of using a cool spell turn after turn is so fun. That's still true today. A value mirror is a blast. There are 2 problems with it. The first is imprinting an extra turn spell. The game is over immediately. The second is imprinting something extremely repetitive, such as a board wipe or a sweeper, so that the game cannot move forward. The latter is something to be a lot less worried about in 2025. There are so many answers to artifacts in decks that even if you're under a board lock, can get you out of it. The first one is well addressed by bracketed play through the restrictions on combos and lower overall density of extra turn effects. And regardless of the bracket system, many tables have a good idea of whether they enjoy infinite combos appearing in their games and if that's something they want players to do in their deck. Finally, it does take a full turn and a large mana investment, and people have several windows to respond to it. They can kill it before you untap in response to the ability, or after the ability resolves and your opponent is down a card. I agree, this is completely fine. On the face, it's just going to be a cool card that allows you to recast something very awesome over and over again. Yes, people are going to abuse it. Yes, you're going to see it imprint a couple extra turn spells, but again, that's a huge mana investment. That's 5 CMC for Panoptic Mirror, and then 5 CMC for the imprinted extra turn spell. So you're in deep at that point with a huge mana investment and still have to pass the turn. So I think it's going to be chill. Finally, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what they said on Dockside Extortionist, Jeweled Lotus, and Mana Crypt. Gavin states, "We would be plugging our ears if we did not acknowledge the elephant in the room when it comes to the series of unbans. The September bans of Dockside, Lotus, and Mana Crypt. Many players out there probably immediately scrolled down this long article as quickly as they could to discover the fates of these cards. We did talk about these cards and are not unbanning them at this time. Opinions from the Commander format panel varied, from some believing Commander is more fun without them, others would like more time to see how the Commander bracket system is adopted before doing anything here, and others felt it's too soon to do anything with these cards. There were a few people who were open to doing something with Jeweled Lotus now, but that was not the majority opinion. The overwhelming majority of the panel did not want to do anything with any of these cards at this time. We will be transparent and say that I believe if any of these were ever to return, most likely one is Jeweled Lotus, due to its one-shot nature, iconic feel, and ability to help support high mana value commanders. I want to be clear, this is not me saying that it will ever happen, but that was the one among the panel with the most traction. I want to take some time to address these cards specifically because they're hot topics, right? We have Dockside, Mana Crypt, and Jeweled Lotus. Right out of the gate, I think some of them not wanting to touch them, it just makes sense, right? The last thing the previous rules committee did was ban all of these, so to instantly get the reins of Commander handed over to Wizards of the Coast, and the first thing they do is unban all the cards that caused the rules committee to step down, that would just look bad. It would look really bad. You know, no matter if they're like, they put a lot of reason to it, they said, hey, we're not doing this intentionally to spit in their face, there's going to be players saying, oh yeah, that was definitely just a, hey, you didn't do it right, here's what we're doing. But I do think in the new world of these bracket systems, it's possible, but maybe in a world where the bracket system is more fleshed out, because right now I understand it's in beta form. I just think it's really, really rough. There's some things that are working really well. Like when you're playing a bracket 3, you understand that you're going to be playing against some very powerful cards. Where I struggle with this is I've specifically been brewing decks on the channel that hit the bracket 2, and I've been brewing decks that specifically exclude all game changers, and these bracket 2 decks are doing what my bracket 3 decks did. You know, there's almost no difference except I'm not using the game changers, and I know that's not in the spirit of the bracket system, but I think there needs to be more nuance in the bracket 2. Bracket 2 says this is going to be similar to your modern day precons. I am not a fan of the modern day precons, and I'm just going to come out and say that, and I've said that on the channel before. Some of the new Dragonstorm Tarkir commander decks had up to 3 card advantage pieces in it. This means if you sleeved up that deck, you were subscribing to maybe top decking for the entire game, which is insane to me. So I think a lot of players are already just making more powerful decks than precons, and there's not a lot of nuance or places for them to go on the bracket system if they're like, I want to play an optimized deck, but I don't want it to include any of the bracket 3 cards. So I do think the bracket system needs looked at. I think they could utilize bracket 1 and bracket 4 specifically a little better, and maybe flesh out some more play styles for the Commander community. And with that bracket system, I say unban Mana Crypt, I say unban Jeweled Lotus for sure. Let players play with their cards that they bought, you know? Magic cards are meant to be played with, and yes, these cards are super powerful, but in a game where you're trying to go fast and you want to play these high CMC commanders that kind of need a little bit of a boost to be viable in a higher power level, you know, environment, I think Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt are pretty necessary and do a lot to help the variety of the format when it comes to playing high power level with high CMC commanders. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments down below. They also mentioned my boy Primetime and kind of said he's staying where he's at, so I'm kind of sad about that. Gavin says, while it is a beloved and nostalgic, the amount this card accelerates is massive and can really dominate the game. Those who play back when it was legal know how often the game would revolve around a Primeval Titan. Whether it died or not, cloning it or otherwise, I do think this is a card that could potentially return to be in the Game Changers list, but this card can be extremely warping and now was not the time. I'll link the article below for anybody that wants to read it, but he goes on to talk about several other cards. So if you guys have a specific banned card that you want to know, hey, is this getting unbanned? Gavin will probably touch on it.